Hi friends. So I'm still working on my newest long video, which is going to be the next part in the History of Gynax series that I've been working on. It's taking a bit more time to finish than I had intended because I've been busier than usual over the past couple weeks, and because I don't want there to be a huge gap in between the videos I put out, I decided I should put out something shorter right now while I continue to work on the new Gynax video. Earlier this year, I beat Ys 9, finally completing every game in the Ys series, and I gotta say, it was a fantastic experience. So, in celebration of me finishing the series, I figured I'd take some time and do a ranking of every game, so that's what this video is gonna be. Now, before we start, I want to make a few quick points. First, this is going to be a completely spoiler-free video. Second, I'm only going to be ranking the versions of the games that Falcom themselves consider canonical. What that means in practice is that Oath in Felghana and Memories of Celceta will be ranked, while Wanderers from Ys, Mask of the Sun, and Dawn of Ys won't be. Third, I'm going to be ranking Ys 1 separately from Ys 2. I know the two games are bundled together, and most reviewers tend to talk about both simultaneously, but to me, the two games have enough significant differences that one walked away in significantly higher esteem than the other. And last, I thoroughly enjoyed every game in the series, even those that I ranked near the bottom of my list. I may have significantly more problems with those, but I would still recommend you check out every game, as I had fun with them all. Alright, all that being said, let's start the countdown. For anyone with even a slight familiarity with the series, seeing Ys 5 ranked at the bottom will not come as a surprise, as it's widely considered the black sheep of the entire franchise. Though the plot is interesting, and definitely feels like an Ys story, just about everything else in the game suggests that Falcom was in the midst of an identity crisis while they were making it. Simply put, Ys 5 has major Squaresoft envy. The graphics, the music, even the text boxes scream SNES-era Final Fantasy. Hell, even the story revolves around Adol seeking out a set of magical crystals. It's obvious to me that Falcom were trying way too hard to imitate Square's flagship series, but in doing so, they abandoned basically everything that gave Ys its own identity. But it's not just this Final Fantasy envy that holds Ys 5 back. The combat, while still enjoyable, is noticeably slow and clunky, which is very out of character for the series. To add insult to injury, the game is absurdly easy, perhaps one of the easiest action RPGs I've ever played. Even the bosses, which are usually challenging in other Ys games, are a walk in the park, requiring you to just mash the attack button mindlessly until they die. Falcom didn't make another Ys game for close to a decade after Ys 5. The negative reception basically forced them to reevaluate the status of the franchise. Fans, myself included, have been hoping that Falcom will remake the game, as they'd previously done with Ys 3 and 4, and Falcom president Toshihiro Kondo even said in interviews that's something he'd be interested in doing. Alas, no such remake has materialized yet, so this is the version we're stuck with. Despite it being the worst game in the series by far, I'd still recommend playing it, as the story is solid and the gameplay, while flawed, has a decent foundation. Just don't expect to be blown away. It pains me to rank the Ark of Napishtim this low, as it's a game I have an incredible amount of respect for. It introduced a fantastic new engine that would later be expanded in Oath of Felghana and Origin, and most importantly, it resurrected the Ys franchise after almost a decade of dormancy, re-establishing it as one of the most significant action RPG series in video game history. Despite this, the game has a number of glaring flaws that prevent me from placing it higher. First of all, the game is very short. Now, this wouldn't ordinarily be a problem, as most Ys games prior to 8 were short, and that didn't make them bad. What makes Ys 6 different is the way in which it chose to pad out its length. Most Ys games, from 6 onwards, utilizes light platforming elements. Ys 6 went in hardest on this, and it handled those elements the worst. Many reviewers have rightly complained about the dash jump, which is a method of extending your airtime that requires a needlessly arcane button combination to execute, but this isn't even my biggest problem. Yes, the dash jump is a pain in the ass to pull off, but I was able to get the hang of it pretty quickly, and you don't actually need to use it to access the main areas of the game. That being said, the mechanic does help emphasize my biggest issue that I had, and that is, if you fail at platforming in this game, you fall, and you fall far. You'll end up in a completely isolated area of whatever map you're in, and be forced to take time and wander back to where you started, Because platforming requires decent precision, and because enemies can and will knock you off your path, this will happen a lot. Combine that with the fact that the game seems to require significantly more grinding than the others, and that means that Ys 6 is the only game in the series that caused me to feel genuine frustration while playing it. Again, this is not a bad game by any means, but it is a frustrating one. Of the original Ys duology, in my eyes, 2 ranks lower than 1. That's not to say that 2 made no improvements over its predecessor. It provided an excellent conclusion to the story introduced in the previous game, the new magic system was a lot of fun, and the bump combat was, at least to me, more forgiving than it was in 1. So why do I consider it inferior? Simply put, it's the dungeons, namely their size. Every dungeon in the game is excessively long and complex, and because the environments within those dungeons tend to look very samey, it's very easy to lose your bearings. The Temple of Ys is by far the most obnoxious. This is its map, and that doesn't even include the east and west wings, as well as its underground canal, which itself has multiple levels to navigate. I fully admit that I played most of the game with the GameFAQs maps open next to me, and I don't regret it for a second. Also, on a totally unrelated note, I found the final 2 bosses anticlimactically easy, which is especially jarring given the fact that the rest of the bosses in this game were quite challenging. Those issues aside, because the game is built on the same foundation as Ys 1, there's a lot to enjoy. It looks great, the soundtrack kicks ass. Really, if you do what I did and use the maps to help you with the dungeons, you're probably going to have a good time with it. Of all the games on this list, Memories of Celceta is the one that left me feeling the most disappointed. The beginning hooked me immediately, starting in medias res with Adol having lost his memories. After hooking up with some companions, he's commissioned by the Governor General to investigate and map out the Great Forest of Celceta. For anyone who's played Ys 8, this should all sound very familiar. It's clear that Falcom used this game as a foundation for Adol's later exploration of the Isle of Seiren, and I loved Ys 8, so this is obviously a good thing. Sure, the gameplay isn't nearly as refined as it would be in Ys 8. I, for one, could never get totally used to that camera, but it's an older game, so that's to be expected. Aside from that, I like the characters, the music is fantastic as per usual, so why did I find it so disappointing? Simply put, Memories of Celceta is the one game where the story was a massive letdown. Despite its initial promise, I felt that the ending just did not stick the landing, and unfortunately, because I promised to keep this video spoiler-free, I can't really go into detail as to why. I will say this, though. I found the antagonist's motivations to be more than a bit suspect, I found the almost complete absence of Dogi to be a major disappointment, and above all else, I found the very end of the game to be abrupt, almost startlingly so. I know Falcom themselves are aware of this, the game itself makes direct reference to its abrupt end, but to this day I can't understand why they chose to end the story this way. If you can get past that disappointment, the rest of the game is a lot of fun, so I still recommend it. Here it is, the one that started it all. Though I'm ranking it right in the middle, Ys 1 is probably the game that feels the most nostalgic to replay. So much about this game just feels comforting to me. The small but detailed world, Yuzo Koshiro's amazing soundtrack, the bump combat, even the boss fights, which are admittedly very difficult, especially for someone who hasn't played the game before. The difficulty doesn't feel cheap though. You need skill to take them down, and finally beating them is beyond satisfying. Aside from the fact that the bump combat feels a bit more unforgiving than it does in Ys 2, I have only a couple real complaints. You often feel as though you don't have a lot of direction and are forced to talk to every NPC to find out what to do, though I understand this is a symptom of 8-bit RPGs in general. My other complaint is the absurd decision to cap Adol's maximum level at 10. Yes, 10. Even with minimal grinding, you can easily reach level 10 around halfway through the game. This means that so much of the combat, including everything in the final dungeon, is basically meaningless. It's a very weird choice, but it certainly isn't a deal breaker. Ys 7 was another series milestone. It was the first game that utilized the party system that would later be refined for Memories of Celceta, 8, and 9. I love that system, so that right there is enough to raise it up in my eyes. Honestly, Ys 7 is probably one of the easiest games in the series to recommend to new players. The only complaint I really have is there's a portion in the second half that necessitates a bunch of backtracking. They try and introduce a plot-related reason for why it's necessary, but it feels like they're stretching it a bit. But really, that's all the complaint I have. The rest of the game is fantastic through and through. Plus, it's the only game in the story thus far that lets you play as Dogi. I gotta give it credit for that. Origin is the one game that's grown on me the most since first playing it. When I first started it, I had some major issues. The fact that the game exchanges unbridled adventure and discovery for a straightforward crawl up Devil's Tower was really hard to get used to, and honestly, I was never fully able to get used to it in the end. Despite the fact that Falcom went out of their way to make each section of the tower visually distinct, I still felt very much like I was confined to a narrow space. Additionally, the game forces you to beat it 3 different times, one with each character, to get the complete story. And there are some very, very obvious difficulty imbalances depending on which character you're playing as. To be more specific, there were some bosses that, when playing as Unica, took me close to 10 tries to take down, but when I later fought them again as Hugo, they took me only 1, and that one time didn't see me trying very hard. So what made Origin grow on me so much, despite these issues? For starters, the character writing in this game is arguably the best in the entire series. Additionally, Origin was the final game made under the Pishtim engine, and it's by far the most refined that engine has ever been. Combat is an absolute blast, and it's made even better by the fact that the bosses are some of the best in the series, with many of them acting as direct callbacks to those in Ys 1 and 2. In all, Origin is perhaps the best example of why you shouldn't be dictated by your first impressions. I'm glad I gave the game time to grow, because it's a fantastic piece of work. The third of the 3 Napishtim engine games, The Oath in Felghana is just an incredible experience, completely overshadowing the game it remade, Wanderers from Ys, in just about every way. Returning to Dogi's hometown of Felghana, Adol discovers the land under siege by monsters, a long-dormant volcano, and an oppressive local lord. Of course, Adol being Adol, he has to get involved somehow. Again, I can't think of a single significant complaint I have with the game. Parts of it are quite a challenge, but challenge has never bothered me with an Ys game, and that doesn't change here. The combat, while not being as refined as it would become in Origin, is still phenomenal. The soundtrack is amazing, with Valestein Castle being one of the best songs in the entire series, and without giving anything away, Chester is a phenomenally written character. Oath in Felghana has long been regarded as one of the best entries in the entire Ys franchise, and after playing it, it's not hard to understand why. I can't recommend this game highly enough. Some of you may be surprised to see Ys 9 ranked so high, as it's one of the more divisive entries in the series. And indeed, like Origin, I wasn't sure if I was going to love it when I started. Like Origin, you're confined to a single area, in this case the prison city of Bolduc. I get there's a plot reason for this. Adol is literally a prisoner, it makes sense for the player to feel confined. But even so, at first it felt too confining. For a while, so many areas were closed off that it felt like you're on rails. Thankfully, the world opens up pretty quickly, and oh man, does it get fun at that point. Bolduc is enormous, and you can run around the city with your monstrum powers like you're Spider-Man or something. The combat is a more refined version of what we would find in Ys 8. Admittedly, it's easier than any of the Napishtim games, and I know some fans may not be into that, but it's so damn fun the reduced difficulty isn't an issue for me. And it's not like the game is a cakewalk, especially if you're playing it on some of the higher difficulty settings. But what most impressed me about Ys 9 is its story. It vies with Origin as the best in the series. Like Memories of Celceta, the game leans hard into mystery early on, but unlike Memories of Celceta, those mysteries more than pay off in the end. Outside of that, most of the game focuses on the individual narratives of the 5 other monstrums accompanying Adol, and their stories are also wonderfully constructed, providing some fantastic world building for the nation of Gallia and their tumultuous relationship with the Roman Empire. I don't want every game in this series to be like Ys 9, but I'm sure as hell glad this game exists. Don't let the divisive reviews fool you. This is absolutely worth playing. Okay, this is probably the least climactic end to this countdown for anyone who even has the slightest familiarity with Ys as a franchise. Many consider Lacrimosa of Dana to be not only the best Ys game, but one of the best action RPGs ever made, period. Here we find Adol, Dogi, and the rest of the crew of the Lombardia shipwrecked onto the Isle of Seiran. Banding together to form Castaway Village, they're tasked with exploring the Uncharted Isle and discovering the source of its mysteries. This game has so much going for it. The Isle of Seiran is by far the most gorgeous environment Falcom's ever created, and from the first moment you hear Sunshine Coastline blast through your speakers, you're going to want to explore every square inch. Just the sheer act of mapping out the island is a blast, to say nothing of the combat. This may be a controversial take, but this is by far my favorite combat system in the Ys series. Yeah, I love the Napishtim games, but this is just the perfect combination of acceptable difficulty, character variation, and combat acrobatics, and I have to give it credit for introducing some bona fide great side content. Falcom took a hint from the Trails series and made each side quest shed light on the lives of the other castaways. It's a system they carried over to Ys 9, and I hope they keep it going. Outside of these side stories, the A-plot is more than captivating as well. Like Ys 7, Lacrimosa of Dana is another great entry point into the series. It's almost the platonic ideal of what an Ys game should be. The only downside to that is, after that, you're not going to play anything better. But regardless of whether it's your first or your last, you need to make a point to play this game. It's by far the best Ys game, and indeed one of the greatest action RPGs of all time. So yeah, there's my countdown of every canonical Ys game. I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I've actually been thinking about doing more of these shorter form videos in the future. I'm definitely not going to make it the focus of the channel. I'm always going to put most of my time and energy into the long form stuff, because honestly that's the kind of stuff I like doing the most. But obviously those videos can take a long time to finish, and if I ever take longer than expected, like I am with these Gynax videos, I don't want there to be long stretches of time when there's just nothing released on the channel at all. If you like it, I have some more ideas for videos like this in the works, like some more countdowns, just some recommendations of stuff that I like, some kind of like beginner's guide kind of things, I don't know, stuff like that. Anyway, I'm gonna do more work on the Gunbuster video now. See you guys later.